Rishav here from the Slightly Smarter podcast. Join me and Ryan as we talk to young, smart people about how they think and what they think. We're asking age-old questions to age-young people who are busy becoming thought leaders, creating art, building powerful businesses, and generally thinking about life's more interesting questions. For more, you can subscribe to us on YouTube and iTunes, and you can find us on Facebook at Slightly Smarter.
Quick intro. Hello and welcome to the Slightly Smarter podcast. I'm Ryan Teo, and with me, our host Rishav Das and our guest TB. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So we just wanted to start off our podcast then with an introduction to those who may not know about you, TB. So
yes, that would be quite a few.
Who are you? What's your story?
So I'm an artificial intelligence engineer with a certain company, and I have been working on data structures and data warehousing for a while now. Got interested in data around 3 years back. And besides what I do at work, I also take a very keen interest in symbolism, physics, theoretical physics, and spirituality, and a lot of other aspects. Basically trying to figure out life.
That is you forgot the part where you're actually my cousin.
But, that is a very wide range there. Can we start with artificial intelligence? Like, do you want to just give us a rundown, a layman's explanation of what AI is?
Sure. So the basic way of computing that we have had till now is that whenever people who program things, for example, we are now chatting on Google Hangouts, and the way someone would have made this is that they would have written that if this happens, then the program should do this. So it's always a if-then clause that goes along with the entire thing. And artificial intelligence is actually a subset of machine learning. And machine learning, what it does is that it takes a lot of examples and tries to learn from those examples. And those examples come in the form of numbers. And it tries to understand from those numbers with algorithms running in the background. To have a more intuitive understanding of this, I think what artificial intelligence also does is tries to emulate the human brain as to how we as humans think about different things. So the structure of artificial intelligence is also in terms of neurons. So that's where terms like neural nets and things as such have come up. Mm-hmm. So what happens is intuitively, if you think about it, let me give you an example. Say if I just ask you over how many countries in Africa does the equator pass through? And probably you would know, probably you wouldn't know. Now, if you wouldn't know, then I could show you the map of Africa and show the equator passing through it. And as soon as I do that, you would be able to actually count the countries. My voice came as input to you, and that translated into a visual perception of going about understanding that, and you can actually give the count. So in artificial intelligence also, we are trying to do the same thing. Can you give me just a moment? Just a moment.
No, so while he's gone, it's interesting because our brains have 100 billion neurons. The most advanced computer on the planet, which is Google's DeepMind, that has 1 billion. Mm-hmm. We're actually really far away from ever being able to emulate the brain.
Yes. It might. I'm sorry, I was gone. It might seem like we are very far away, but it seems like we are very far away because a lot of things that are being done in the field of artificial intelligence do not reach the masses. It is still in the confines of different research labs across the world. So
given that it's all hidden from us, right?
Yes, it almost comes across as that.
Do you fear what they have behind closed doors?
I can't say that, although Elon Musk has a lot of fears of his own. I can't say that because I don't know. Of the things that I know that certain things are being done in the area of deep learning, which is, again, along the lines of artificial intelligence. And they are very compelling things which are being done. I think of late I happened to read this news where Facebook had this AI, these two different AI algorithms who were trying to make a certain thing possible. And suddenly they started communicating with each other in a language which was completely non-perceivable to humans, and they got really scared and they actually cut it off. Now, I don't know the validity of that news or what actually happened, but something like that does not seem like it's so far away, in the sense that if humans can come up with their own languages, and humans do have a lot of different languages, then AI can also come up with its own language in terms of communicating with each other in a more robust way than we do.
Right.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of things like Apple's Siri or Tesla's self-driving features? Do you consider that AI?
Yes. So the thing is that artificial intelligence can also be broken down into, say, things like artificial natural intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and artificial super intelligence. So Siri is like artificial natural intelligence, which is actually more like the low hanging fruits of what artificial intelligence can actually give. So Siri does not have a consciousness of its own.
Right.
Siri still is working out of speech to text conversion, and trying to understand how a particular sentence is spoken, trying to understand context, which again falls under the paradigm of natural language processing. So Siri is like a low-hanging fruit of artificial intelligence. And then comes the self-driving cars. Now, self-driving cars are along the lines of computer vision. Now, computer vision is actually trying to solve the problem of vision. And what Tesla actually tries to do is it tries to do object classification. And we humans also try to do object classification at all points of time. If you go out in the street and you look at a tree, you know it's a tree because you have classified that as a tree.
Right.
You look at a person, you know it's a human being. You look at a dog, you know it's a dog. So, and the way it has happened with you is also with lots of examples of this that you have observed since the time you were born. And so definitely these are along the lines of artificial intelligence, but I think Rishabh mentioned DeepMind. So DeepMind is actually trying to solve a greater problem with respect to AI, which is it's trying to solve artificial general intelligence. And what they are doing is that they have actually taken these games from the 1990s. These are these Atari games and Nintendo games that kids in the 90s used to play. And they have started letting an AI play those games. So they don't have a different algorithm for each game that the AI is playing. It's one particular set of algorithms combined into one particular thing that they have placed in one game, and then they see games as different environments. So they just keep changing these environments, and they let the AI train on that, so that it has a general idea of what to do regardless of whichever environment it is placed in.
Mm.
So that is definitely a higher form of artificial intelligence.
Can we backtrack just a little bit? And can you give an explanation of the differences between artificial natural intelligence, general intelligence, and super intelligence?
Yes. So artificial natural intelligence is artificial intelligence that is applied to smaller problems that companies, institutions, or places like that, organizations face, like say Siri, or say a company wants to direct certain ads to you. Say when you go to Amazon, at that point of time, you buy a product from Amazon, and you get a small thing at the bottom which says, people who bought this also bought this. Or in YouTube, you have recommendations. So these are all forms of ANI. Artificial general intelligence is the level of intelligence at which human beings are at. And artificial superintelligence is described by a lot of different futurists as a point of singularity,
Right.
um, where it would definitely have passed the intelligence that human beings have, and it would do nothing but serve its own intelligence. And if you actually take a step back again and try to actually get an intuitive feel of what artificial superintelligence would be like, then we just have to observe ourselves. If you look at humans and the way humans have evolved through time, uh, all the three of us, for example, right now sitting, we don't really care about the cat who's walking somewhere down the street, or a dog who's lurking somewhere down the street, or a lion who's there somewhere, because we are more intelligent than them. And all we do is we serve our own intelligence. And so it would seem to suggest that an artificial superintelligence would also want to only serve its own intelligence, in the sense that artificial intelligence, being a computing mechanism, needs hardware, powerful hardware. And for example, the gaming industry has helped push this hardware to the stage it is at now, because conceptions of AI were there even in the 60s, but people were not able to actualize it because they just did not have the computing resources.
Right.
So now you will hear about Facebook or Google or big organizations like this that have huge data centers somewhere in Antarctica or somewhere. And what I think would happen with artificial superintelligence, right, is that it would try to convert Earth into a computer, into a huge hardware, because it would need that kind of a resource and that kind of computational power to realize the nature of reality, if I am to go to something like that, because everybody's trying to figure that out.
Right. So that brings a really interesting point, which is that we can think about these things in the really, really long term. But do you think those ideas are affecting how you're living your life today?
Okay. So the thing is, you have to understand that we are already like cyborgs. We are like not like cyborgs as you would think of them with respect to movies, but the fact that we are so intertwined with our phones, and what we put out in the social media is what we wish to project about ourselves and things like that. I think these ideas about the future are, see, this is the way I see things going forward, right? Because I think if at all the universe has a purpose, then the purpose is to make itself more and more conscious, to make itself more and more full of life. Now, what you and I call as life, and what I am referring to life out here, is different. Like, um, I'm not talking about life as in this living process, this living being. I'm talking about the fact that it will just lend itself to more and more complexity, right?
More sapience. Would you say that?
Yes. It will just become it. Otherwise, as such, there is no point to the universe, right? It's just there. Like, I mean, some of the questions that some of the questions that really bog me and have bogged people for centuries together is that why is there something instead of nothing? You know, there could very well have been nothing, but there is something. And somehow we are being able to perceive this because we are born and we just suddenly find ourselves in this weird place, and we're just going about trying to understand things about this place. We classify things in this place because we don't know any way otherwise. You see, if I can digress a little bit, because we are on the subject, I'll take a take with respect to physics. Now, I had become a person who, even though I was working with data, I became very interested in theoretical physics and maths because I thought I always wanted to understand absolute truth, absolute truth. And for some reason, maths seemed to be that thing which actually is trying to talk about absolute truth. So the thing that is happening with the physics community now is that it never gets put out in the mass media, and it will never be. But physics is sort of at a standstill. And I will go into it. One of the biggest deterrents in physics is the strength of the Higgs field. You might have heard of the Higgs boson, which the media popularized as the God particle. I don't know why they did that, but it's just a particle. Just to give you an idea of the Higgs field and to understand how fundamental it is. So there are certain particles, okay? And they pass through this Higgs field. And when they pass through that Higgs field, and only when they pass through that Higgs field, do they gain mass? Do they become electrons, protons, neutrons? Now, the theories that we have right now would seem to suggest that the Higgs field either had to have a value of 0 or an enormous number. If it would have been 0, there would have been nothing. And if there had to be something, it would have had to be an enormous number. But this number is not enormous. It is actually trillions of times smaller than what theory predicts it to be. It is
sorry,
really small.
you said the Higgs field has to have a value of 0 or something large, right? What is that value?
By theory. So I don't know about the exact value. I mean,
what value is it measuring?
So it is measuring the energy of that Higgs field.
Okay.
And the fact that in CERN, they discovered the Higgs boson, that validated the fact. So theoretically, Higgs boson can't be there if the Higgs field is not there. So the Higgs boson validated the fact that the Higgs field is there. But scientists don't know how to arrive at the value of that Higgs field as yet, you see. There are lots of other things with respect to science. For example, there's a very interesting talk that I watched recently by this gentleman called Dr. Rupert Sheldrake. So he was talking about the dogmatic assumptions of science and the fact that the world at large now takes science to be already, to have science already have explained the nature of reality. So he was actually very interested in the constants that we have. For example, the speed of light, and the gravitational constant, the capital G, as they put it. And what he noticed is that, say, in the 1940s and the 1960s, the measurements which were made of the speed of light at all different places in the world, and the measurements that were made of the speed of light recently, so in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, was almost 20 kilometers per second slower at that time. And the same went with the gravitational constant. It was actually smaller. But there's a department of meteorology that actually is in charge of all the metric systems of the world. So they have made the speed of light as a constant, right? They said that we solved this problem because our entire metric system has considered this as a constant, and everything is based on this. And what he had to say was that if the values of capital G, the gravitational constant, and speed of light are falling at the same time and rising up at the same time with all these very slight minor fluctuations, and if that is actually put out on the internet, it would actually bring about a new revolution in science, you know. But that TED Talk was banned.
Oh.
Yes.
Banned by TED.
Yes. So, you see,
I want to delve a little bit further into what you were saying there, which is kind of our belief in science to be the all-knowing, right? It's that if we stop believing in science, then what do we believe in, right?
So the thing is, I personally don't believe in anything. I read about a lot of things. I don't believe in anything. These are just certain patterns that we have made for ourselves, which are very useful, but doesn't mean a thing. For example, we have the equator. It's a very useful line. It doesn't mean a thing. What does it do? It's an imaginary line. What does it do? It doesn't do anything. Similarly, what do triangles do? What do squares do? And these don't do anything, right? Like, so I actually try to go about life in a very experiential way. because even though I work on AI, I would actually not prefer calling it AI, but just machine learning. I understand that we are trying to create some really intelligent things, but we are not exploring ourselves, which is actually way more intelligent already, and try to figure out our own intelligence by ourselves, not by grabbing knowledge out of something, you know. I'll just tell you.
So let's go a little bit further into that, right?
Yeah.
How did you journey of, let's call it self-discovery, right? Or deeper thought about ourselves. How did you go about starting that? Because I know that a lot of people in this day and age are bombarded with more information to think about, right? So they're not focusing on themselves, and they may not be focusing on themselves rather. How did you, when did you think, actually, you know what, I'm going to think about this?
So it actually started with me being a go-doer. So in college, I used to keep myself busy at all points of time in trying to do different things. Then I saw that just doing different things isn't giving me anything. So then I started going into physics and maths. And then when I realized a lot of dogmatic assumptions with respect to physics and maths and the community that is doing that about it, I understood that the science has sort of see, I'm not talking about all people associated with science, right? Because they're actually trying to put a real hard effort.
You mean the scientific establishment, right?
Scientific endeavor, I'm not questioning that. I'm all for science. I'm all for science. But the scientific endeavor was always an endeavor of inquiry. And somehow the notion that has translated to the masses is believing in science as an authority. And I don't see that any different from people believing in religious authority, because at the end of the day, it's authority. So when I had notions like this, I started picking up stuff that I not believe in such things, you know, like, or have any sort of belief in such things, but I actually started listening to a certain people, like Jiddu Krishnamurti, Alan Watts, um, then even Bruce Lee, although it's not like he has had a lot to speak. But if you go to Google and if you search Bruce Lee's library, then you find that Bruce Lee is Bruce Lee not because he was a great martial artist, but because of the philosophy and the notion he gave towards martial arts, and as to what his philosophy was with respect to martial arts. He read 25,000 books by the time he was 31. That's an incredible lot. And he was a student of philosophy. And he read all these different kinds of books. And when I saw the books that he read, it got me really interested. And I started reading these books. And I got very interested in the aspects that they talk about. Then I got very interested in the aspect of symbolism, because humans who existed before us have had to, like, let us imagine for a moment that the structured world that we have right now was not there, and you suddenly happen to get born in this world with no buildings, with no concept of money, with nothing of that sort, and you feel that you're conscious, that you're being able to perceive these things. Wouldn't you then feel an urgent need to try to figure out all of this? An urgent need. We don't feel an urgent need right now because we have a lot of convenience and a lot of comfort. And I think I think going by those lines, I got very interested in symbolism. I'll talk about symbolism.
Hold on. Going back to what you said about us not being curious because we're comfortable, don't you think it's the opposite way? I mean, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You first need to fulfill those needs, then those comforts, and then you can start higher thinking. And if you look back at ancient philosophers who have done great work, they're usually the aristocrats, right? The ones who already fulfilled everything they need before they can start thinking about the whys, the hows, and the wheres, the whats.
Yes. So I agree with you partly, but see, again, I'm really trying to find words here, because I question thought. You see, every assumption that lots of great people have had, be it Maslow, be it Einstein, be it Newton, be it Tesla, Nikola Tesla, or anyone, Plato, all of these people. Like, the thing is that I question thought, because thought is very useful. You can do a lot of intelligent things when you put thought into use. You can do a ton of things, you know. And when you say that you're thinking about something higher, what is this higher thing that you're thinking about? You know, what is it that you are trying to explain? What is it that we are trying to explain? I know that at this point, probably I'm sounding very abstract, but what I mean to say is that, see, externally, you and I and a lot of other individuals can be capable of doing a lot of different things. There is this individual called Malcolm Gladwell, who has a 10,000 hour rule, who says that if you do something for 10,000 hours and dedicate yourself completely to that, you become extremely good at it. It does happen. It does happen. Because I can choose to make myself be very good with respect to any one particular field. Say if I stay in the field of artificial intelligence for the next 40 years, I might become a person who knows or understands a lot about this field. Does that mean that I know things which are higher than what a farmer knows? You know, how do you define
That's
what is?
Yeah, like how do you define what is more important to know?
Yeah, you know, like I'm going into a bit of Zen philosophy, where they're talking about this aspect of a wave, and they're saying that a crest can't exist without a trough, and the trough can't exist without a crest. You know, and how do you know that this is something higher? Are we not just telling stories to ourselves when we are saying that this is higher or this is lower, or this is a better way to go about understanding things and that is not a better way of understanding things? It's very haphazard, you know. At least in my experience of understanding of these things, it's very haphazard. I will tell you that I don't understand these things. I don't.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out these things. But it is this curiosity which is what keeps me going.
Let me try to explain what I have in my mind about the difference between higher level thinking and lower level thinking. So
Right.
I'd say lower level thinking is things that come instinctually to you, like breathing, like your heart beating. That kind of thing is so low level that you barely need to think about it for it to be happening. Okay, then maybe one step up would be eating. You know, you need food. It comes instinctively to you. You know, it came instinctively to the people before us, the hunter-gatherers. And then high level thinking about that might very well be farming agriculture, but it could also be AI and machine learning. So that's kind of how I look at the spectrum.
Right. So out there, on the first notion that you spoke about with respect to breathing or your heartbeat, the thing is, then you have to understand that your body has an intelligence of its own that you are not aware of. That it is, because if you stop your breath right now, you are dead. You'll die. Like, there is no other higher thing to understand. So probably that is quite a high thing. It's quite a high form of intelligence, this breath and your heartbeat. So I am of this notion that we don't really give that much importance to biology out of the three sciences. And biology is very interesting, right? Let me get into it by first talking about certain kinds of symbolism, and then I will go into this. And actually, let us try to actually inquire, both of us, me and you together, let us try to inquire as to what is a higher goal as opposed to a lower goal.
Okay, before we start, can I try to explain why I think biology may not be as respected as the other sciences? I think it's because if you think about the ladder of whys, if you try to explain why things happen, I think biology is quite low on that ladder. So for example, if you talk about biology, you ask why does the digestive system work that way? You need to use chemistry. Chemistry is your answer to that. You know, you talk about the pHs of your stomach acid and how those things work. And then you have to ask, okay, but why does chemistry do that to your food? Then that comes in with physics, like the bonds in between atoms and how they react. And if you want to explain physics, you ask, why does physics work? That's mathematics, right? And this is what you're talking about, mathematics being the highest level of knowledge, in a way, in a sense. And so there's this great quote. It's like, chemistry answers only to physics. Physics answers only to mathematics. And mathematics answers only to God.
Yes. So that's a brilliant quote. That's a brilliant quote. But you see, God is a very heavy-weighted term. But before digressing into God, about the aspect of biology, now tell me, let me go into consciousness. That is biology. That is not physics. Physics does not explain it. Chemistry does not explain it. Chemistry
explains it in part.
Yeah,
chemistry explains the emotion.
Explains it in part, but if you actually look at different communities around the world, there's a University of Consciousness Studies now. There is there's a NYU University that studies the brain and as to what the brain does. And we actually don't really understand consciousness.
Yeah.
That's where I think biology becomes interesting. If you actually really wind the clock of time and go back to earlier civilizations, like the ancient Egyptian civilization, or the Chinese or the Japanese or the Indian civilization. I'm talking about more of Asiatic civilizations, because they paid a lot of attention to biology as opposed to other things. Now, the thing is, let me bring artificial intelligence also out here. One of the biggest pioneers of artificial intelligence, who is even called the godfather of artificial intelligence, Geoffrey Hinton. So Geoffrey Hinton actually started off by studying a lot of different subjects, from psychology to philosophy to maths to physics, and then he finally ended up with AI. And his notion was that the brain actually makes holographic projections of different things. And he wanted to solve that with respect to computing, with respect to maths and algorithms. Now, that is the modern way of looking at it. If you go back to all these Asiatic cultures that I'm talking about, you will see that there's a lot of symbolism. Even the Red Cross Society, if I'm not mistaken, has this particular straight line, and there are two snakes that swirl up, okay, and they meet at this one point.
Yeah.
Now that is one symbolism which has been there throughout the world. In Egypt also, there is this thing called the Eye of Ra, which they're talking about. And it might seem like just a mystical notion, you know. But if you actually cut the cross-section of your brain from here, and if you see it top down, then they are actually trying to show this cross-section of the brain, which looks exactly like the Eye of Ra.
Wow.
Exactly.
That is amazing.
Exactly. And the thing is, in yoga, for example, they talk about something called the Kundalini. But before I jump into yoga, let me actually talk about it in a more modern way, which is the cerebrospinal fluid. So there has been very little research done on the cerebrospinal fluid. And there's this particular individual who started exploring the cerebrospinal fluid in a certain lab somewhere in England. And what he saw was that the cerebrospinal fluid actually runs up your spine, goes through the medulla oblongata, and then it bathes your entire brain. It bathes your entire brain, okay? And see, this is the spine, and you can, for people who are just listening to the podcast, they can imagine 3 holes through a circle that is passing. That is how the spine would look like from the bottom. And the middle thing is the cerebrospinal fluid, and then is the pineal gland and the pituitary gland. So this pineal gland, pituitary gland, and the cerebrospinal fluid actually meet out here. And in ancient cultures, they talk about this as the third eye and things like that. When they're talking about the Eye of Ra, they are actually talking about this meeting of the cerebrospinal fluid, the pineal gland, and the pituitary gland.
Right.
Now, when I'm talking about the cerebrospinal fluid bathing the brain, what I mean to say is that the brain is a collection of trillions and trillions of neurons. And whatever you are doing, different neurons are getting fired in your brain. And that is how thought is happening. So thought is basically this firing of neurons. And the cerebrospinal fluid does not need any synapse. You see, it just bathes the brain, you know. And in Buddhist ways, in Tibetan Buddhism, when a person dies, to find out if they were able to escape the cycle of life and death, as the Buddhists talk about it, they take a blade of grass and they put it in this region of the head. That is where these 3 fluids actually meet. And they see if there's a hole. Usually there's a hole. And they see if the blade of grass actually goes into that hole. Or they see if a certain fluid has come out. And the guy who was researching on the cerebrospinal fluid got very interested, because he was like, is this what they are talking about? Is this what all these cultures of yoga or all these ancient cultures, were they actually talking about this particular thing? In Kundalini yoga, for example, they call the cerebrospinal fluid the Shushumna. And they call the pineal gland and the pituitary gland the Ida and the Pingala. And they say that when you are in a spiritual process of enlightenment, okay, you have this cerebrospinal, this energy that sort of rises from the bottom of your spine and goes and bathes your brain to such an extent that this intelligence does not require any synapse to pass through. So it is out of the boundaries of thought, because to them, thought is just like you are programmed. It's just like code. Just you're thinking about things because that's a program. And, you know, drenching your entire brain with that cerebrospinal fluid that completely envelops the brain is the state of enlightenment that they try to talk about biologically. So I do think that biology is quite interesting. I don't like using the word important. I think it's quite interesting in trying to figure things out, you know, like just in terms of curiosity. I think it definitely makes me curious.
So branching off that curiosity, right? People were thinking about these things hundreds and thousands of years ago. Let's just forget the fact that this is so long ago that we can't imagine. I can't even begin to think about the kinds of things they must have been thinking about. You know, because we have all of this knowledge and this you know, access to information, and yet I feel as though the leaps that they were making, were they bigger than the leaps we're making today?
There is no leap to make, is what they would say at that time. Okay. That's what they would say. They would say that there is no leap to make because the idea of reality that they would have is very different from how we could even conceive it in the confines of thought. So they would have a very different notion of it.
So thought is confining you? Do you feel that?
Well, you see, say if I wouldn't have spoken about these things and if you wouldn't have stumbled across these things, would you have thought with regards to these things? You wouldn't.
Exactly. So that's what I'm so curious about, because you can't let, you know, I was talking to Ryan the other day about how they invented the light bulb. You talked about Nikola Tesla. We can talk about Edison, and no one invented the light bulb by improving the candle. You know, it's just you've completely got to think about something that's so drastically different. That's so crazy. But do you think that we all have that within us? Is it possible for us to be that crazy and stupid that we may end up being right?
I think every individual has the capacity to harness the highest levels of intelligence that is possible. Okay. I definitely think that that is possible. Now, when you're talking about electricity or these things, they are very useful things. I am very grateful for these things. I am very grateful for the internet to be there because we're able to have this conversation right now. These are very useful things, but useful and popularity is not synonymous with truth or what essentially is.
Yeah, the internet is not fundamental.
Yes. But the internet can be thought of as a huge brain, right? Can be thought of as this collective brain of information. Say if an AI were to train on the internet, we are fucked. I mean, can you possibly have anything to contribute that the AI doesn't know already? You know? So at that point of time, when you have thoughts like this, you really question thought in itself, right?
But then, okay, if we didn't have thought, then we wouldn't be discussing this. It's like we needed thought to think about the limitation of thought, right?
Yes. See, thinking about thought is also thought. Thinking about thought is also thought. And okay, because this, whenever I talk to my friends also about something like this with respect to thought and the fragility of thought, it actually ends up becoming very abstract, and it's difficult to pull a notion of it. So in a more modern contextual way, let me actually pull out something that you would have probably heard about, which is the simulation theory. The simulation theory has been put out by this individual called Nick Bostrom. And what he says is that there are three possibilities. One is that the human civilization has evolved to such an extent that if you consider for the slightest delta of improvement in say computer games or virtual reality, then it has evolved to such a state that it is being able to run ancestor simulations in order to understand how we were before we got there, in order to understand, because even we right now use all the tools at our disposal to understand how humans were before we are what we are right now.
Right.
So they say that they might be running these simulations which are so unbelievably real that we are in this simulation without realizing the fact that we are in a simulation.
Right. That's one of Elon Musk's pet theories, right?
Yes, yes, and he's picked this off of. I'm sure he would have thought about it himself as well. A person like him, who actually really goes into the depth of these things, and I think he, for one, definitely does. So that is one possibility. The second possibility that Bostrom states is that we would lose any interest in forming, in running these ancestor simulations, because we have already evolved to such a higher state that we are probably just energy. We are not in the human body. We are not confined to a body. We are just energy, and we have just, evolved so much that we don't care about running these ancestor simulations, in which case they would have started running these simulations and lost interest, in which case we are stuck in a limbo. Okay. And the third possibility is that the humans have not evolved to the extent that we will be able to run these simulations. But the thing is, we know that the next moment is going to happen, right? That an hour from now, existence is going to be there. And because we know that existence is going to be there an hour from now, it means that the third possibility is definitely shoved down, right? That we definitely are going to become something where we can simulate these things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then say Geoffrey Hinton's notion of the brain being a holographic projection of reality and things like that. It's rather interesting, It's because if I just intuitively think about imagination, then is imagination local, local and non-local?
Is that your phone?
It is. 1 second. Is that fine?
Yes, that's better. But you flipped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So go on. You were saying about imagination.
Yeah. So if I just intuitively think about imagination, right? I don't feel like it's in my brain. I don't feel like it's in this physical box of this brain. It's somewhere here. It's somewhere around me. It's not in my physical brain though. You see, that's why people talk about collective consciousness and consciousness.
This is crazy. This is crazy. I was telling Ryan about the crossword thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea that they measured
what is this crossword thing?
So they did a study, right, where they took a small group of people and they compared how they did in crosswords to the general public. And they would give the same test to the same groups and scores would be similar. And then one time they gave the test group a crossword that the public had already done, and the scores went up by 20%. I mean, more fundamentally than that, you have to think, how is it possible that some of the greatest scientific discoveries happened together? Meaning there were many people in the world who were discovering the same thing at roughly the same time.
Right. So
it's as if you put an idea out there, you can simply just pluck it from thin air.
Yes. So I was talking about this person called Rupert Sheldrake, right? Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who was actually talking about the delusional dogmatic assumptions of science. So he's actually a scientist himself. And what he proposes is this idea of morphic resonance, where he says that we actually do this, whatever you are describing right now. We actually pick things up like that. Like, say, a giraffe, for example, when it is born in the belly of another giraffe, does not know that it's a giraffe, but it picks up that veil of consciousness that makes it a giraffe. You see. So he talks about this idea of morphic resonance and this idea that consciousness is there everywhere, in the sense that even sea has consciousness, the mountains have consciousness, everything is conscious. It's just that we think that the way we perceive consciousness is the only way to perceive what consciousness is supposed to be.
Well, I guess it's because it's the only thing that we know, right? I mean, what you've just blown my mind, because I'm just thinking, when we're kids, right, when we're babies, when we're being born, no one ever told me that I was a human.
Yeah. So there's another very interesting thing. When you are babies, the cerebrospinal fluid is like, for the first 43 days after you're born, the cerebrospinal fluid is there in immense amounts out here. Immense amounts. And then it slowly starts decreasing. So it's almost like, see, there are these philosophical questions where you're like, would you know how it is to be alive if you were never dead?
You were never dead. What? Wow, that is extremely interesting. Like, I've never heard that before. I've heard that does cold exist? No, cold doesn't exist, right? Cold is just the absence of heat energy. And darkness exists? No, that's just the absence of light. Now
is darkness faster than light?
Darkness faster than light? Darkness is just the absence of light. I wouldn't say darkness is anything.
Without darkness, there is no light.
But
I'm genuinely.
Yeah, so these are philosophical questions. So,
but there's actually quite a few things that we do as babies, right, which were beneficial to us being alive now. And actually, if we did them today, would be good for us. So, like, for example, one example you talked about was the fluid that you mentioned. The other thing is, when babies breathe, right, they breathe into their stomach. So they actually take in more air more oxygen, and they're able to fuel their brains better.
Yes.
Whereas now we breathe into our lungs.
Yes.
I'm not saying they breathe literally into their stomach. But what I'm saying is their stomach inflates when they breathe, whereas now our chest inflates. Why is it that we've actually deteriorated in our ability to run biologically as we grow older?
Okay. I think because we have innately lost that intimate connection with nature, you know, very much in the realm of materialism. Materialism is very helpful, useful, beneficial. I have nothing against materialism. I'm saying that I personally would have liked humans to have evolved in such a way that when any building springs up, there are creepers and plants and things like that that grow along with the buildings.
Exactly.
So that we are
Why did
always
we do that 2,500 years too late? Because it's happening now. We went to dinner at that place, the in Bangalore while I was visiting TD. We went to this beautiful restaurant, right? An incredible building, and the building had, vertical gardens and everything. That's common in Singapore now. But it's 2,500 years late. I kind of wish we could go back and live in an age before the agricultural revolution, before all of this started,
Is TD still there?
I think we might have lost him.
I think we lost TD. Shall we call it a show then? It's been about 1 hour.
Well, in the midst of having lost him.
Yeah.
Just give him 10 more seconds, just in case he does come back. Because otherwise, but there's, do you wish that maybe you would have lived in that age?
I think part of it is about how the grass is always greener on the other side. If you were in that age and you had known about this future where buildings had sprung up, where currency existed, where all these different things have been created by the technology we have, I think if you were a hunter-gatherer at that time, you might want to come back to where we are now. So I think part of it is that the grass is always greener on the other side.
On the other side, always, always. I think we have a lot of interesting questions to keep pondering about. I think what I do for myself is that I let the questions brew in my head without actually trying to arrive at an answer. Because whenever I arrive at an answer, I'm telling myself that this is the answer, and I put myself in a comfort zone with respect to understanding that aspect. So I just let all these different questions keep growing in my head and figure out life.
So this comes back to what you were saying about you not believing in anything.
Nothing. I think belief.
That makes sense now, because if you believe in something, then you kind of take it for granted.
Yes. Exactly why I don't believe in anything. You see, I read about different religions. I read about different kinds of spirituality. I read about theoretical physics, and I work on artificial intelligence. But I don't believe in any of the things that they stand for or any of the things that they call out, because as soon as I believe in them, I will stop exploring for myself, right? And I want to explore for myself.
Well, do you think it's possible to believe in things, but at the same time be open-minded, be scientific?
Yes. But I'm sure that when you do that, you will flush out one particular belief that you held at one point of time. And as you have a better understanding of things, you will have a different belief. And then you flush that out. So I think that's a good process where you keep an open mind. You can have a certain belief with regards to certain things and just keep an open mind.
So you believe the progression of knowledge is beliefs evolving or changing? Beliefs rather evolving or changing?
Yes.
I'd say that's the definition of science, actually, that you're willing to change your mind in light of new evidence. And I think that's what the scientific endeavor is all about. And that's where the scientific establishment has deviated from the scientific endeavor sometimes.
Great, great.
All right. Well, I think that we've started asking some really interesting questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that over the next few weeks, months, years, we will continue to ask even more in-depth questions.
Yes, definitely. We ought to. Have to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still questioning the speed of darkness. I'll probably not sleep tonight with that in my mind. But I would, the next time we do have a conversation, which I'm sure will be soon, but I want to dig deeper into what young people should be doing, right? With regards to this knowledge and this understanding about the fact that there are things that we can be doing to elevate our thought, and whether or not we can find out what those things are.
Definitely. We should. I mean, I think we explored a lot of different subjects today, and I think the subject of what we as a generation ought to do can be the matter of another discussion.
That's it. What should our generation do next? That's the real question. I guess that is almost the question of this entire podcast. It's, find out what people are thinking now as a way to pave the way for what we should be thinking about in the future.
Great. It was really nice talking to you, Ryan.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. We'd love to have you again sometime.
Thank you. I'm glad you had me.
Okay, Rishabh, do you want to end the podcast?
Then. I do. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on episode 2 of Slightly Smarter. Join us next week for another conversation, hopefully just as intriguing and maybe as eye-opening. Thank you very much, TD, for joining us, and we'll speak to you guys soon.
Cheers. Have a great day.